Welcome. Good morning. It's great to see your smiling faces. This is the McCarthy Institute Symposium on Trademark Law for 2018. And we're very pleased to be hosted by Google. I'd like to do a special thank you to Annabel. I don't know where Annabel is. There's Annabel sitting next to the dean. Thank you. Annabel, would you stand up, please, and say hi? Annabel is the new director of trademarks in-house at Google and has been very gracious in hosting us here. I don't know if Terry Chen is going to be here today. Is Terry here? Terry. Hi, Terry. Terry is the new director of intellectual property law for Google in-house and was the person with whom I first made contact about them hosting us here. So we're also very grateful to Terry. We have here our founding director of the McCarthy Institute, Tom McCarthy. If you'd stand up and say hi. And we also have here the dean of the law school at USF, who's going to come up and say a few remarks, John Tresvigna.
Thank you, David, and good morning, everyone. It's a really delight to see all of you here. Saw a number of you last night when this conference got kicked off, and this has now been so many years with this institute and this symposium, and it is a great tribute to Tom McCarthy's worldwide prominence and respect in this field. But so to have so many people, experts from around the country and around the world here assembled in this room. We're very appreciative of our hosts of Google. We'd love to make you better known by this conference. So I'll do what I can. But really to be able to bring in the type of people we have here and really have this as an opportunity also for our students. We are training the next generation of all of you who are in this field. This field is changing so rapidly. It is changing in a dynamic way that affects every consumer, every person across the many continents. So you're doing some exciting things. I just want to express my gratitude to so many of the sponsors, to our hosts here at Google. Our member of our board of trustees, Faisal Shah, has been a tremendous support for everything we do at USF and the law school. So with that, I just really want to thank all of you for participating. Look forward to a great conference ahead of us and all our work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. And I'm Russ Pangborn. I just want to say a few words of thanks also. First of all, Annabel and Christine Shea have been instrumental in getting this put together, opening up their beautiful campus to us so that we can have this event. By way of a little background, this whole symposium came about because David and I had lunch one day in San Francisco, and we started talking about so many issues that we were facing when I was at Microsoft at the time. And we decided to put together a little symposium at the law school. We thought it was predominantly going to be law students, and it was really talking about the tensions created between technology and trademarks. And we were surprised that we filled up an entire room there with practitioners from the area, had great open discussions. One of the things we created was the formula of having people from both sides of an issue on the panels and having very open discussions in front of the audience and then engaging the audience as well. So it was a lot of fun. And it was after that first year that we decided, hey, let's take it on the road. I want to showcase some of the Seattle brands, come up to Microsoft, and we'll host it there. And that room sold out much like today. You think about this, this is a Friday work day at Google, and all of you are taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here. It's pretty phenomenal. But we took it to Microsoft, the same type of thing happened. We decided we have to continue this. And one of the things I really appreciate is we've been engaging this symposium at the brand owner sites. We took it after that to New York City, and it was hosted at the Time Warner Center in Midtown Manhattan. Fabulous show there. The next year we took it down to 20th Century Fox Studios, and we had it on the studios in the auditorium. It was just phenomenal. They opened it up, gave the speakers a tour of the studios. We even partnered one year with Oxford and took it to London. And that was a 2-day session where we were able to talk about not only the trademark issues on one day, but we also talked about regulation of search in Europe out at the Rhodes House in Oxford. So that was pretty amazing. But we also decided we needed to get back to the West Coast, keep it over here so that we could have access by students as well. Took it to Amazon last year, which was a phenomenal event. And I'm sure today with the lineup we have, true luminaries. We look at the brand owners involved. We have Google, we have Microsoft, we have Pinterest, we have Amazon. It is phenomenal. PepsiCo, can't forget PepsiCo, of course. So the people here have also come from China, from Europe, from Canada. In the United States, we're covering New York to California, Washington to Texas. So it is an amazing thing to see what started out as a simple idea of talking about trademarks and technology has evolved into this annual event. I really want to thank Dave Franklin for partnering with me on this. This has just been great. And Tom McCarthy, of course, the name behind it all. He is the draw. We all know that, and we appreciate it. Thank you very much, Tom. And with that, I actually want to turn it over to Annabel so she can say a little bit of welcome to all of you. And Annabel, take it away. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I just want to take the opportunity to welcome everyone to Google. We're really thrilled to be hosting the McCarthy Symposium on our campus this year, especially since it's the first time it's in the Silicon Valley. And the excitement extends beyond our trademark team. When we've mentioned to some of our legal colleagues that we're hosting the event, they're always like, is it the McCarthy on trademarks? So that's been a great reaction. We've increased our credibility with our colleagues and outed some trademark nerds that were hiding amongst us. And we're very fortunate that we get to hear from Professor McCarthy later this afternoon. So this is a particularly special event. As Russ mentioned, it's got the cross-section of attendees that are so unusual. It's got the leading practitioners from law firms, academics, students, policymakers, and in-house counsel at major brands. And especially great this year to see so many fellow brand owners in the technology space, both inside and outside the Valley. So, at Google, we have the privilege of working on products that can reach 1 billion users and beyond. For instance, there's Google Maps, which many of you probably use to figure out where is this place 111 Java, or where is Sunnyvale. You probably used Google Search in the last 24 hours to help you with a work project or a school project, or inevitably every 4 years with the Winter Olympics to ask, what is curling? Excluding our Canadian friends. Or you've gotten on YouTube to check out your favorite new music video or how-to video. It's really amazing that we enjoy such easy access to this vast information across the world, and we're very proud to be part of that evolution. And of course, as we know, such access can present some complexities. And on our trademark team, we have the opportunity and the challenge to work on all the trademark issues across all our products, from smaller, modest ones to the big ones that I just mentioned. It's not easy to clear a name for 1 billion people. There's a lot of incentive for bad actors to use the goodwill of our brands to behave badly because they're so familiar to our consumers. And we're always formulating and navigating our removal policies, always with the aim to be responsible but also balanced. So we're really looking forward to today's agenda. It's a wonderful chance to learn from all these great presenters and from everyone in this room. And we're excited to take these insights back to our practices, as I'm sure a lot of you are. Now, before I introduce Etienne, I do want to acknowledge Christine Shea again. Christine, if you could stand yet again. I'm standing here, but Christine is really the person on our team. She's a senior counsel on our team, and she's really been the Google point person and Russ and David's partner in putting together the agenda and organizing the many details for an event like this, along with the help of several wonderful folks at Google, at USF, and the Association Management Solutions. So a big thanks to Christine, and of course to Russ and David and the entire team for everything for today. And you'll see Christine a little later today interviewing Danny Sullivan, one of the keynote speakers. So I now have the privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, Etienne Son de Sado. Apparently, some have called him ATM, but it is Etienne, I've confirmed. Etienne is the CEO of the International Trademark Association, as many of you know, and he's served in that role since 2013. And working with the board of directors and the officers of INTA, he's responsible for all of INTA's programs and policies. He also oversees the operation and administration of the organization. Prior to joining INTA, he was the head of communications at the Office for Harmonization of the Internal Market, known as OHIM. And in that role, he was responsible for OHIM's strategic communication and its corporate image and identity. And he was also a member of the president's cabinet at OHIM. And before his time at OHIM, he practiced law in Spain, and he also taught law for many years at the University of Alicante, which is fitting for this audience filled with so many students and hopefully our future trademark practitioners. So please join me in welcoming Etienne.
Thank you very much, Annabel. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm really thrilled to be here. And I've been generating a lot of envy from my son, who was telling me, oh, you're going to Google, how lucky you are. So I see you sitting on the first row, and I think you're very fortunate to be here. And I hope it's not going to be too boring for you. So if it is, you should tell us, stop and explain that, and we'll try to do that. All right? I, of course, would like to thank Professor McCarthy, Dave Franklin, Dean Tresvigna. It's really a pleasure to be here, and it's really an honor for INTA to be able to sponsor this great conference. So that's really a starting point. Now, let me perhaps, as I have the privilege of being, the keynote speaker, let me tell you what happened to me when preparing this session. I looked at the title, and the title is Trademark Law and Its Challenges. And then I looked at the different sessions, and I thought, all those are really good. They're all great lawyers. I'm not going to be competing with them because I'm going to be losing. So I need to talk about something a little different. And there are some huge challenges that are affecting brand owners. And some of those are not necessarily directly related to IP, or the origin doesn't come necessarily from IP. And this is what I want to talk about today. So let me perhaps start with that. Hopefully, I don't know, okay. All right. So let's talk about trademarks in the context of today's geopolitical landscape. I would like to start with some, analysis of how is the world looking today. Well, let's start with Latin America. What's going to happen over the next months is that we're going to have 350 million voters that are going to be heading to the polls to elect new presidents in Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, Mexico, Paraguay, and Venezuela. Which means that there's going to be a major change in leadership in those countries, a major change in the parties that are going to be leading those countries. And by the way, this is the biggest exercise of democracy in Latin America since the 80s. So that's going to be perhaps, a challenge that we need to think about. Now, if we move into Europe, we can, of course, talk about Brexit. We know that Brexit is generating a lot of doubts, a lot of legal uncertainty. We don't know how long the transition is going to be. We don't even know whether IP is part of the dialogue. As you know, there's been different phases. On the first phase, IP was absolutely not on the table. Now it seems that it's going to be on the table, and still the UK government has appointed a new minister for IP who has absolutely no IP background and who has declared not having interest in IP. It's perhaps a challenge. On top of that, and this is why I decided to choose this picture, we are perceiving a growing anti-EU sentiment within the European Union. And there is also a growing anti-democracy sentiment that is happening in some Eastern countries. I'm thinking about Poland, I'm thinking about Hungary, and we're seeing limitations of rights. And when I talk about limitations of right, I also talk about IP rights, and I'll refer to that more specifically later. 6 months ago, we had elections in Germany, and still today, it's unclear how the new government is going to be put in place, which means that, you know, the strong German leadership of the European Union is not as strong as before. And on top of that, in less than 4 weeks from now, there's going to be elections in Italy, and it seems that the Lega and the Cinque Stelle are going to make, you know, their cause, and both are anti-EU. And finally, sadly, in my home country, I get a lot of questions about the independence of Catalonia. So there is something going on there. Now, I think that's not exactly the PowerPoint I was expecting to have. That happens. I can talk about that, but I changed some slides and I sent a new email yesterday. Sorry about that. That happens. Anyway, I'm gonna use that slide to highlight what I wanted to explain here. You should have had here a picture from the leader of North Korea, just so that you get the scenario. What is the idea about it? Well, the idea is that, as you know, there are huge tensions that continue to happen in the Korean Peninsula. We, at the same time, are seeing talks around nuclear power and armament in Australia, in Myanmar, in Taiwan, in Vietnam. As we know, the US relations with Philippines are not as good as before. Philippines used to be a very strong ally of the United States. That's not the case anymore. And while this is happening, what we see is a very strong increase in the influence of both India and China. And one way to look at that is you should just check the amount of speakers from China, leaders, but also CEOs that are coming to the World Economic Forum. That has increased dramatically. Now, what is happening in the US at the same time? And I'm not talking about politics. I want to be very clear. But Dave and David Bernstein, you asked me to be a little more controversial. So that's why I wanted to bring, you know, a few slides like that. I hope I'm, you know, doing what you requested me to do. I will not. Well, the reality is that, you know, without entering into politics, the US is kind of stepping away from its role as the global leader of democracy, but also as the champion of international trade and as the champion of the global economy. In an effort to make America great again, the US is not anymore part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The US is reviewing the NAFTA agreement. And last but not least, the US has withdrawn itself from the Paris Climate Change Agreement. And that is having a huge impact on how the United States is being perceived out there from society, from consumers, and also from policymakers. And this is what should concern us as brand owners. Now, I don't know if there is a possibility to, to change the presentation so that I can have the slides that will explain what I'm. I'm sorry for that. Anyway, I'll go on and hopefully you'll get the presentation that really will illustrate that. You should have here now a slide that would have the picture of an elephant. And the idea about it is that, you know, what is happening is in parallel with the perception of the US administration, US companies are somehow still perceived as the elephant in the room. And what I mean by that is that, unfortunately, in many countries, US companies are perceived as a threat to the domestic economies. If you look at a recent report from Pricewaterhouse on global top companies by market capitalization from 2017, 55 of the top 100 companies globally are US. The top 10 are US. And the US companies are doing right in exploiting their global reach, their financial strength, and their ability to innovate, while other major global companies from... Yep. Now I see myself. While... Okay, so I'll start again. And in contrast to that, we see a lot of, major companies from UK, from the European Union, I'm already making that difference, that are, struggling in being truly innovative, in being truly global. So, as a consequence of that, we see an impact on what I would call brand America, and also an impact on the reputation of American brands outside US. If we look, for example, at the Nation Brands Index survey from Market Research Institute, JFK, which measures the perception of 50 nations in 6 dimensions: governance, export, tourism, investment, immigration, cultural heritage, and people, we would see that historically, United States tended to be number 1, and now United States is number 6. In fact, number 1 is Germany, number 2 is France, 3 UK, 4 Canada, 5 Japan, and then United States only 6. And if we look at the perception of American brands, there was a recent report by the China Skinny Consumer Research Institute, again in 2017, and the results showed that 41.2% of Chinese respondents had a more negative view of the US than 4 years ago. And in particular, for US food and beverage industry, mother and baby, beauty products, these industries are facing a decline in positive perception that goes up to 10% just in China. So what we're facing today is a kind of anti-US administration sentiment that is coupled with a certain level of anti-US companies sentiment. And this is somehow driving the mindset of both executive and legislative powers across the world. I'm going to give you a few examples. We've seen recent cases in Europe of abuse of market dominance against US corporations. We've recently seen an increase in tax bills affecting US companies. There was a very recent article, thank you so much, of course. There was a very recent article on the Financial Times So I'm going to move quickly. That was the elephant in the room, as you could imagine. That was the impact on brand America and American brands. Well, as I was saying, there is, a strong anti-US administration, anti-US companies, practical examples, recent cases of abuse of market dominance, increasing tax bills. Just the day before yesterday, there was an article on the Financial Times that was talking about India taking the lead to change taxation of US corporations under the concept of significant economic presence on the India market. And that is directly targeting Facebook, but it's going to affect all of us. And finally, we're going to be talking about internet later on. We've seen a lot of issues about the use of geonames on the internet. Those are clear examples of that. But let's perhaps talk about something that is, I would say, more dear to our hearts and that is closer to our practice. And this is the anti-IP sentiment and how the anti-IP sentiment is affecting brand owners. So when we talk about the anti-IP sentiment, it seems that policymakers are forgetting the critical role of trademarks as sources of information and also the critical role as brands as promises of delivery. We see that IP is more and more viewed by the public at large as a way for companies to make far too much money. And finally, we see that trademarks are being threatened by various governments in their attempts to address other very relevant social issues like health, like right to access to information, etc., etc. But that's probably going too far. And this is about brand restrictions. And there is no better way to illustrate brand restrictions than with such a picture. And by the way, if I went back to the starting of my presentation, you would see that there is no INTA logo on the beginning. And what would happen, by the way, if political parties around the world were not able to use their logos? Because that would be plain packaging as well for them. And that's perhaps the kind of concept that we need to start developing. So imagine you go to a supermarket, you use to the brands that are familiar to you, that give trust to you, that allow you to make your choices, and all of a sudden you have none of that. You're totally lost. So what is the concept of brand restriction? Well, if I look at Article 20 of the TRIPS agreement, it says, the use of a trademark in the course of trade shall not be unjustifiably encumbered by special requirements such as use with another trademark, use in a special form, or use in a manner detrimental to its capability to distinguish goods and services of one undertaking from those of other undertakings. Well, this is what's happening with brand restrictions. And I'm not going to be referring just to plain packaging. I'm not going to be referring just to tobacco. We know it started from there, but it's going far beyond that. In fact, brand restrictions started with the efforts of governments to protect public health. We all know it started in Australia back in 2011. And we also know that this is being driven by the World Health Organization. But then we've seen more recently cases where brand restrictions have been used to somehow influence public order. In 2017, the Hungarian Draft Act has been banning the use of symbols of totalitarianism for commercial purposes. What does that mean? Well, I love beer. And, you know, now it seems that if I go to Hungary and I ask for a Heineken, the red star symbol will disappear from the Heineken brand because the Hungarian government considers that this is a symbol of totalitarianism and it cannot be allowed to be used. And if we go beyond that, we see that now governments are thinking about limiting advertising and marketing to some market segments, to some consumers, particularly to young consumers. And just very recently, we had the Chilean law from 2016, we had the Peruvian law from 2013, and there is now a project of law in Colombia that is talking about the advertising function of trademarks and the fact that this should not happen, and is limiting the right of brand owners when targeting consumers that are young consumers. And now there is the question whether a young consumer, what is the age limit? Are we talking about 16? Are we talking about 14? Are we talking about 12? Who knows? So let's talk about some examples of brand restrictions, and these are just a few. Of course, we know it started with tobacco, no doubt, but it has been moving to alcohol. And just to give you an example, the Indonesian government is considering the introduction of regulations refraining manufacturers of using their brands that have more than 20% of the label that goes on the product. In Latin America, we know that a lot of efforts are being made on limiting the use on trademarks on pharmaceuticals. We also see this happening with foods and drinks. Just to give you one concrete example, in 2016, the Chilean food law forced a Kellogg company to remove their iconic Tony cartoon from the packaging of their cereals. And in a conversation I had with the Chilean government myself at the time, they told me, oh, you brand owners should be happy because we're even considering to limit the right of brand owners on toys. And I said, what? And they said to me, yes, parents spend far too much money buying toys for their children. We need to stop that. Where are we going? This is not about tobacco anymore. And of course, this is truly a global phenomenon. Now, what we do know from an economic perspective is that brands have always very heavily contributed to global growth, to global trade, and to the national economies of each and every member state in terms of GDP, in terms of employment, in terms of social welfare. Well, it seems that, the lawmakers of these same countries do forget that. If we look at the top 100 brands, they have continuously increased their value, growing steadily over the past 11 years, even during recession, and up to $3.4 billion just in 2016. Now, let me show you a report that was issued by Brand Finance just last year. And this is about the impact analysis of plain packaging on 8 major food and beverage brand-owning companies. It is about the impact of plain packaging on alcohol, confectionery, snacks, sugary drinks. And the 8 companies, as you can see, are AB InBev, the Coca-Cola company, Danone, Heineken, Mondelez International, Nestlé, PepsiCo, and Pernod Ricard. So we're looking at a portfolio of 907 brands. Well, the result of their analysis in terms of impact is that the contribution of the brands to their companies was to fall by 33.9% in case, plain packaging would apply to them. Which means that, the overall enterprise value for these companies would fall by almost 16.5%. And that also means that the total loss of value for these companies would be $186 billion. And of course, as it was quoted by the CEO of Brand Finance, this is just, let's say, the kind of, direct impact. What about the indirect impact? What about, all those companies that are around those 8 big food and beverage companies? We're talking about advertising, we're talking about design, we're talking about a lot of support activities that would be strongly affected by plain packaging. So what is INTA doing in order to face this situation? Well, as you can see, we have been working on this issue, in fact, since, and you would be surprised, since 1993, because that was the first time that in Brazil there was an initiative to restrict the right of brand owners. But then it was really in 2007 when we started with comments on draft legislations, with the amicus brief that was presented to the World Trade Organization, with a board resolution, with a presidential task force, I'll refer to that in a minute, and of course with engaging government as much as we can. Here I'm just showing you some examples of submissions we've made to the different governments around the world. Every time we hear about a brand restriction initiative, we take action and we submit a letter with all the existing legal arguments. And just to refer to a few of them, we're talking about Article 6, 7, and 10 of the Paris Convention. We're talking about Article 2.2 of the Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement. We're talking about Article 20 of TRIPS. At a regional level, of course, we're talking about, the violation of laws in terms of requirement for use, because that's a huge potential impact. We would, for example, use the argument of Article 17 of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. But finally, we also mention, the issues of freedom of expression and the concept of right of receiving information, which, by the way, those same governments are using when they talk about internet through their GAC representatives. So it's funny that, they're trying to use those rights to somehow, limit the ability of brand owners. And at the same time, they're trying to grant those rights to consumers. So there is some kind of inconsistency there. And here we could talk about Article 10 of the European Convention for the Protection of Human Rights. We could talk, of course, of the First Amendment, and we talk about, Article 11 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. If you're interested, this is, the state of play of the different member states that have already implemented some kind of, either plain packaging or brand restriction. And you can see here which are the products that have been affected and what has been the action taken by INTA. This is, of course, the amicus we filed before the World Trade Organization. And interestingly enough as well, everybody has heard about the resolution, but the resolution has not been formally issued. So that's kind of, weird. Back in 2015, the INTA board passed a resolution on plain packaging. So I don't think there is need to refer to that. Now, of course, all that is great, but the reality is that, legal arguments are not sufficient. And this is where we need as well to reinforce consumer trust as much as we can. Because we should never forget the slide we had at the beginning where you get into a supermarket and you're totally lost because you don't have any brands. And that's the kind of message that we need to pass to the consumers. And on top of that, we need to explain, the positive contribution of IP to the economies of the different member states, to the employment. And this is what we're trying to do by engaging consumers. So it's really about promoting the positive impact of IP. It's about advocating for a safer internet, and we'll talk about that later on. And it's about engaging consumer associations and building bridges with key stakeholders. My promise to you as the representative of INTA is that we will continue to do that, and we will really work hard on that. Now, kind of very final message to brand owners. We cannot just use the legal arguments. We need to start using other kind of arguments. We need to start using soft arguments. And my experience as a European living in the US, I'm really serious about this anti-US sentiment, and I'm really concerned by that. And I would say that the conversations we had 4 years ago with policymakers were kind of more pleasant than what there are today. And my recommendation to you, I'm going to be very specific about the European Union. As you know, there's going to be elections at the EU Parliament, which means there's going to be a change of scenario. If you need to build teams, policy relations, government relations team in Europe, it's the moment to do that, because it's going to take you a good 8 to 10 months. And you need to start thinking about that, because more and more the laws are being done by the EU Parliament, and these laws are affecting brand owners. And unfortunately, because of the parties that are getting elected, because of the lawmakers that are getting elected, we see more and more of this anti-IP sentiment I was talking about. Thank you very much.